Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Five Stripes Tonight, right here on the Dirty South Soccer YouTube and Facebook channel. My name is Sydney Hunt. I am an editor and writer at Dirty South Soccer, SB Nation's home for everything Atlanta United. Thanks for joining us. It's another busy Atlanta sports night. As, of course, the Atlanta Hawks are tipping off against the Milwaukee Bucks in Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals at 8:30. So, if you're watching this live, you still have some time before the game kicks off. So thanks for coming on. If you have any questions throughout the night, feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those as the show goes on. And also a great time to remind you, if you miss any or all of the show, you can go on our YouTube and Facebook channels to catch the replay. Hey, a tough night for Atlanta United as they fell 1-0 to NYCFC at Red Bull Arena. And let's be honest, the scoreline probably flattered Atlanta United just a bit, as they never really looked like a team that were going to come away with 3 points against the Citizens. But that 69th minute goal by Ishmael to Shradi ended up being the difference, and Atlanta United, of course, have to go home with no points. Sunday at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, though, they take on Red Bull Arena's primary tenant and MLS's other New York-based team, of course, the New York Red Bulls. And as you all know, if you're an Atlanta United fan, the Red Bulls have had all kinds of success against Atlanta United. 6-1-2 in 9 all-time matches. Of course, the one win that Atlanta United received over the Red Bulls, we all know what happened that year. But outside of that, in the regular season, Red Bulls have really had Atlanta United's number. Is this the time that Atlanta United can pick up that long-awaited first regular season win against New York Red Bulls? We'll find out on Sunday. My guest tonight is Joel Goldstein. He is a co-host of the Seeing Red podcast. You can catch that on seeingredny.com, as well as your favorite podcatcher. Joe, how are you tonight?
I'm doing very well, Sydney. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming. I'm glad you can make it out on this Friday evening. I want to start out with some breaking news, and probably not exactly breaking news since it's been out over the past day or so, but yeah. I want to touch on Caden Clark and, of course, the news that he'll be transferred to RB Leipzig starting July 1st. He'll join the club. He will be playing, of course, for Jesse Marsch, who Red Bull fans know all about. But I want to get your thoughts first on Clark's trajectory. He's had a tremendous career with Red Bulls. During his brief time with the first team, was this a case of, as soon as he saw him the first time, I want to correct myself. I said it was a loss for Atlanta United at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's why I said everyone knows what happened. I may have said loss, but I digress. But Caden Clark, let's talk about Caden Clark. Was this a case of when you first saw him with New York Red Bulls 2, you knew that this kid would be a star right away, or do you think it would take a while for him to get his bearings in MLS with the first team?
I don't think, upon watching him the first couple of games, I mean, you could see that he's a tremendously talented player. He's got great vision, but I think it took him a little while to kind of settle into the Red Bull style. But he still found ways, even in those early games, to stand out in moments. And there's one assist that comes to mind regularly in a game against Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Beautiful free kick, floating ball to the back post to Omar Sow, who had to do a lot of work to get a terrific shot on goal, ended up in a goal. And I mean, you could see these flashes from him, but you didn't necessarily see the ability to have sort of the impact at the MLS level so quickly, at least not for me. When he first started playing last summer for the team, it was after a really difficult period. I think the end of the Chris Armas era was difficult for a lot of fans to watch. I think a lot of their stomachs had already turned much earlier in the season and just were ready for it to be done. And Caden's rise sort of coincides with the end of that. So I think he helped sort of wash away some difficult memories. But last year, there were moments in games where you'd see him kind of fade out, or teams might be able to use their physicality to create problems for him. But he's really grown over the last year and has found a way to utilize his body. I don't think he's necessarily put on a lot of mass or bulked up the way some other guys are, although obviously he's still growing. He's a young boy.
Yeah.
But he's been a lot more clever with the way that teams have tried to put a body on him. Like you watch the assist he had on the Kyle Duncan goal. It's a light assist because Duncan does a lot of the work afterwards. But the ball comes into him. Dax McCarty's right on his back. That's not an easy guy to deal with in any situation.
No.
Red Bull fans know that very well. And, he makes Dax look almost foolish in that moment. He spins him, sends a perfect ball wide. And that's the kind of stuff that we didn't see enough of last year, but that we've seen him do this year that has been so impressive. And I think anyone that had been aware of Clark before he started playing for the MLS team, maybe you didn't necessarily think he would jump so quickly. But once he got to that level and he was putting up the highlights that he was, I think the writing was on the wall pretty early. And the rumors about him having or that he would be sold to Leipzig started, I think, as far back as January. So it was really just a matter of time, I think, at that point.
Yeah. And it's pretty unfortunate, by the way, that he had an appendectomy. So
yeah,
it doesn't appear that he'll be playing this weekend. Unless
not this weekend. He was in the provisional roster for the Gold Cup. That's probably out. So I feel a little bad for him there, but I guess the upside is you get to move to a pretty big league. The team that's been in second place there and struggling against Bayern for the last couple of seasons. You're rejoining Jesse Marsch. Well, he had never played with Marsch, but you're going to join Jesse Marsch, who I think when you talk about managers that have been around this team, his name always comes up in terms of the way the guys always wanted to run through a brick wall for him. Great man motivator, always shows tremendous trust in his young players. And he really does get the best out of guys, 99% of the time. And yeah, I think that heading to Germany might be a little scary if he didn't have, the security blankets of Marsch and Tyler Adams and a pretty terrific team around him.
Yeah, he talked about Marsch's ability to motivate players, and I always think about Marsch, that video of him doing that halftime speech, I believe it was, tell these players, get stuck in, and it's kind of English/German, broken German, telling them to get stuck in and all of that. So, obviously he's a name that holds tremendous weight within the Red Bull soccer organization. And you kind of touched on his impact there in Germany, or not in Germany, but in Europe.
Austria. Now he's heading out to Germany. Although the situation for him heading out to Leipzig is a little bit less, I don't know if desirable is necessarily the right word, but a lot of tremendously gifted players are moving on. Well, a lot of, but Diet Upamecano, Kanate heading to Liverpool. Hannes Wolf is out. That's a lot to contend with. You're losing Nagelsmann, who's been in charge for the last couple of years, and Marsch. I mean, he's not a stranger to having to come into a situation with a team that was performing pretty well, taking over the reins after losing major pieces and coming up with some success. And so I think that he's going to be able to find it in Germany. I think he's got a really talented team, but I think there's definitely going to be some growing pains this year. I don't see them necessarily challenging for the title. I think that they can still get themselves back into a Champions League spot, but it's going to be tough.
One last kind of point on Caden Clark, and then we'll kind of move on. You mentioned, of course, Tyler Adams, who, of course, came out of the Red Bull system. Who's that next? Tyler Adams, or later, let's say, who's that next Caden Clark?
That's a $1 million question. I think when Kevin Thelwell, who's the new sporting director in New York, when he took over the job, that was one of the things that they talked about a lot is the excitement around Tyler Adams was great. And the player, tremendously skilled and talented, high ceiling. but it didn't seem like there was going to be a factory producing that level of player. There was a tremendous amount of leadership problems at the academy level.
Right.
It was a little rudderless for a while. The scouting department had broken down at one point, and a lot of that is being built back up now. I think if you were to look at the Red Bull 2 team, you could see that there's not quite the talent team-wide that they had in their championship season, 2016. But there are still a lot of really talented players. One guy that I was talking about earlier tonight, Raul Mitchell, he's committed to Wake Forest. I would be surprised if we don't see him at least compete for 1 year in college, but tremendously fast, gifted with the ball at his feet. Maybe not quite there with the scoring touch yet, but a really exciting forward. And then, of course, Omar Sow, who I mentioned earlier, big physical body, good again with the ball at his feet, has a great sense of the field. He can react very quickly, good passing vision, and he can finish. He's got to, I think, get a little bit more consistent in terms of finishing, but those two guys I could see as maybe the next most exciting prospects coming through. And then as sort of the bronze medal winner right now, looking at those teams, I'm going to give it to Danny Edelman, a young defensive midfielder, not unlike Tyler. He's a little bit of a smaller frame, great bite, not as good of a passer, but he's fearless in that same way and tireless. So another good player to keep an eye on.
Yeah. I will say this about Clark. One more point about Clark. I'm sure Minnesota United aren't too thrilled that they gave up his rights to New York Red Bulls. I bet they are hoping that they could take that move back.
Yeah. I think the writing was on the wall a little bit there. I don't think Caden comes to New York Red Bull if it didn't have a path to get to Leipzig in the first place. I think that was a big part of getting him here. He was part of a group of players who have kind of made their way to New York Red Bulls from Academy Director Sean McCafferty. He had previously been the Barca Academy Director in the U.S. And guys like Jake LaCava, who's another talented young player, Caden Clark, Jeremy Raffanello, who joined the team this year, they all come from sort of his circle of players that he knew from his time at the Barca Academy. So I think the trajectory for Clark, he was already such a talented and respected midfielder for his age group that he probably could have made a move overseas right away. But having this path directly to the Bundesliga, I think was very attractive for him.
Joel Goldstein from the Seeing Red podcast join us here on Five Stripes Tonight. Again, if you have any questions about the Red Bulls or about the match on Sunday, feel free to drop them in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Joe, I want to ask you about the team itself as a whole under Gerhard Struber, of course, coming on board after Chris Armas was sacked by New York Red Bulls after last season or toward the end of last season. Can you talk about the team thus far, what you're seeing with them, the system that Struber has put in place, and how it's differed or has borne similarities to what Chris Armas' tactical outline was, and maybe before that, just Marsh's tactical outline? Yeah,
I think first, the way that the team has looked so far this season has been a breath of fresh air. We came off of Chris Armas' tenure. I think in the team, nobody has ever admitted to it, but in the team, I think there was a significant amount of friction. The locker room was not settled. And that bore itself out on the field and in the results a little bit. And what Chris, when he took over for Jesse is very much front foot from the first minute to the last minute. You're going to close down. You're going to find sort of these advantageous transitional moments, and you're going to make teams pay for it. You leave yourself open at the back a little bit. So high risk, high reward. But by doing that, you can really hurt a team, especially any team that wants to play out of the back. And so we saw a little bit of a continuation with that with Chris. But the one thing that had always eluded Jesse while he was in charge was when teams sat back and invited pressure. And the Red Bulls just never seemed to be able to figure out how to break down a bunker. And obviously that is going to hurt you, especially in tournament competitions. That playoff success was sort of the elusive last rung of the ladder that the Marsh group had kind of taken on.
Yep.
And when Chris took over, part of his motivation was to find that sort of plan B. And so they began to become a more, I guess, pragmatic team. And they were still pressuring, but it seemed a little bit less targeted than it had previously. And they looked to have, maybe 1-2 goals a game and then sit back. Now, at the same time as Chris taking over, you have a little bit of the transition year where they get the Supporter Shield and had previously set the points record, which has now been broken. The next year when Chris came back, they lost Tyler Adams, who was such a big part of protecting the back line. And so to mitigate the risks of playing so far forward, they started to leave the back line deeper and deeper. And they created this large space between the midfield and the back line that teams just feasted on. You could play diagonal balls. You'd find late runners in at the top of the box. Yeah. And it was a real problem. And so straying away from that system by trying to figure out how to beat teams who could take advantage of that, it just got worse and worse. It was a real tough time for the team. So when Struber took over this year, what we've seen is a return to the tactical pressing, a return to the fitness levels that the team had previously had. And when you see these sorts of mistakes that they're making, I think listening to Chris talk after the games, he stayed fairly positive, but you could see that the mistakes were weighing on him. And I think the most important thing is when you have a young team and they make mistakes like this, I think Atlanta would know a little bit about this from this year. You make these mistakes. It's important to do that because you need to learn from those and you need to grow from those. And I don't know if Chris was necessarily the right coach to get a young team through that. I think that he could be very good for maybe an older team of veterans who aren't necessarily going to be catered to that press mindset. But it did not work for this team. And so Gerhard's done a really nice job of restoring that within the group. They're finding confidence every week. They're okay when these mistakes happen. I mean, you look at that New England game, all 3 of the goals that they gave up in that game, horrible defensive mistakes. And the last one in particular, he called out as saying, we have our defensive assignments on set pieces and we failed here. There's, I'm going to have to talk to a couple players and we're going to figure that out. But it was not, this angry rant that could have been. And again, I think that's another really nice and positive change. And yes, you get guys like Frankie Amaya coming in who can be that sort of pit bull ball winner in the midfield. You got a little bit more out of Drew Yearwood this year. You're getting a lot more out of Captain Sean Davis this year, who's looked probably the best he has in years under Struber. And most importantly, they brought in really strong attacking talent up top. Patrick Klimala and Fabio, who are only really just getting started playing with each other, seem to have a great partnership so far and really understand each other. They have the physical tools to give backlines problems if they're going to play them tight. If they give them space, they're both very quick players and they're both smart with the ball at their feet. And that allows midfielders to get involved in the attack. And in general, just they have more options going forward and they can really put the screws to teams late in the game if they tire out.
Sort of to your point, or maybe counter a bit to your point about Chris Armas looking at the Eastern Conference standings right now, it looks as in 13th, Toronto FC. 5 points through just 9 matches was just a win. Yeah. So I imagine a lot of Red Bull fans are looking at it and saying, "No, we don't really miss this guy at all."
Yeah, they were ready to get rid of him much earlier, and I definitely defended Chris for a long time because I felt like he lost some very big pieces, and also contended with like the long-term injury of Bradley Wright Phillips. When he came back, he was never quite right. And so he had a lot to deal with.
Right.
But at the same time, things just seemed to deteriorate with him at the helm. And yes, I can tell you from still just reading Twitter. I don't interact on Twitter so much anymore, but just reading Twitter and reading Red Bulls fans, they were overjoyed to see that they were not the crazy ones. It's almost like your ex, you see them with their new partner, and you, oh, okay, yes, that's why I'm not with them. Oh, thank goodness, it's somebody else's problem now.
That's a good analogy. I can't say I've ever been in that situation, but that's a good analogy. But
it's good to not have been in that situation.
Exactly,
for sure.
Exactly right. You're exactly right. But switching back a little to Red Bulls, as far as expectations, what are your kind of expectations for them under Struber's first year here in New York in MLS?
I think personally, I would say that continue the streak of making the playoffs, and you want to see improvement from everyone on the roster. You want to see everyone get a little bit better this year. It's a lot coming in. You got a lot of new faces and a lot of acclimation that needs to happen in that process. And so making the playoffs, I think, was a high line for a lot of fans and myself to say that they can do. Watching them play now, my expectations are probably rising, but I think I'm still just trying to keep it leveled out, because I know that what I keep coming around to about these young guys, they're going to need time to learn and to make these kinds of mistakes and to grow.
Yeah.
And so, make the playoffs, maybe get a home playoff game. That's the line.
Red Bulls currently with 12 points through 9 matches, 1 point back of DC United and the Eastern Conference standings. Together with Joe here from the Seeing Red podcast, seeingredny.com. We got to talk about Aaron Long, of course, that horrific injury that he suffered. That a player like him, that's an injury that obviously has a tremendous impact on any club. How is Red Bulls coping with that injury?
I mean, I think they're doing about as well as anyone would have expected. When he went down, I think doom and gloom was definitely out there. And the first game after that was the first loss to New England. They came out, they scored early. Andres Reyes, who many people penciled in as the guy who's going to start now that Long is out, gets a goal to start the game and then a red card before the end of the first half. And I think that had everyone hitting the panic button at the time. Amro Tarek was still coming back from injury. And nobody really knew what the Red Bulls had in mind to even fix what they would do against Orlando. They brought in Tom Edwards, a right back, played him at center back. He seemed to get the job done. Reyes has been back the last couple of weeks and has looked very good. So while the losing Aaron for his leadership abilities, there's no way to replace that. I've watched Aaron Long grow. I started covering the Red Bull 2 team with a weekly podcast in 2016. It happened to coincide with a phenomenal year for the 2 team, right. And the rise of Aaron Long and of Tyler Adams and Derek Etienne. I mean, it was just a crazy amount of talented players on that team. But Aaron really stood out to me that year, and making the leap to MLS, you could see that the talent was there, but he didn't necessarily have the leadership chops yet. And that had come over time. And he became a very good organizer on the back line and just a tremendous presence. His energy and his ability on the ball with his feet or controlling the ball in the air, all of that was great stuff. And I think not having him has been difficult, but they've coped very well. I think Reyes is doing a very good job so far. He shows a lot of those same abilities, maybe not quite as refined yet, but he's definitely growing week in and week out. And hopefully he continues to show more restraint than he did in that New England match.
Speaking of injuries, I want to talk about maybe some injuries. I saw that I believe Goodman was out, who, of course, Atlanta United fans know Filoni from Atlanta. He was out. Danny Royer was out. Diarra was out. And a host of other players who were out against the Revs the other night. What's the injury situation looking like going into Sunday against Atlanta?
I mean, you're pretty much looking at that same list. Maybe a guy like Florian Valot is on the bench, but I think for the most part, what you see is what you get from that group. Who was on the pitch or on the bench against New England is who you're going to see against Atlanta. John Tolkien has been filling in at left back. Andrew Gutman started the year very well, has been injured for the last couple of games. But John Tolkien has done a pretty admirable job. Not the best performance against the Revs, but he's done okay there. And they're just kind of trying to figure out the best midfield group. Wilkeman Carmona, who is he's a 17-year-old Venezuelan. He's really talented. He had a really nice second half against the Revs the other night, where the Red Bulls nearly climbed back in. Nearly and New York Red Bulls should be synonyms. They're quite often together. But yeah, I mean, the team depth, I think overall is much better than it's been in years past. The roster is filled out with players that I think are far more balanced than we've seen before. So, if I was going to be looking at a team from, let's say, the Hans Bacco or Mike Petke era, that's the 2010 to 2015 seasons. Sure. That starting 11 stacked, great players. Anything beyond that, it was dicey. It was, if you could get one or two bench players, that would be very good. The Red Bulls this year, they've gotten good minutes from Jason Pendant, like over this past weekend. The 17-year-old Carmona, John Tolkien, who I don't think anybody expected to be starting in any capacity this year. He was further down the depth chart last season behind Patrick Segrist, who really did not show well for us early and really didn't see the pitch again once Pendant had gotten here. You got minutes from him. You got minutes from Reyes. Like I mentioned, Tom Edwards. He had played center back. He played defensive midfielder the last couple of games. You're still missing Christian Caceres. That's been tough. He's been such a spark plug for them. And of course, missing Caden for the next couple of weeks is going to be really difficult. But all in all, the Red Bulls have the talent to force teams to earn the results against them. I don't think that they necessarily give up the results, despite the fact that, they made a number of mistakes that went punished last week, or I guess Wednesday rather.
Right. Gonna kind of wrap this up in just a little bit, but I did have a question on YouTube, and thank you, Ariel Kandadash. I think I pronounced your name right. Hopefully I did, but thank you for your comment here on YouTube. It's about Caden Clark.
Sure.
What do you think that we'll see him in the U.S. men's national team?
It's a shame that the answer is not going to be the Gold Cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think this would have been a great sort of coming out party for him. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him in maybe some qualifiers coming up. Probably an outside chance. They have a lot of players at the position. But, maybe maybe January friendlies isn't a bad time to get him out there and kind of get him acclimated.
Right.
But I mean, he's so young. He has so much time. I think within the next 3 years, he's going to work his way into a regular role of some kind with the national team.
Ariel said, I did pronounce their name right, so I'm glad I did. I didn't want to butcher the name. I was a little afraid I would. Again, I'm going to cut you loose here in a few minutes, here in just a little bit. But before we do you care to give a scoreline prediction for Sunday?
Sure. I'll do the same exact prediction I had on Seeing Red, which is a 2-2 draw. It'll be the first road point for the Red Bulls on the year. Mm. I don't know. I always feel good with them going down to Mercedes-Benz, except for the one time, which you had to mention at the top of the show.
just as a public service, man, they have to.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I think that based on what I've seen from Atlanta, I think that they're going to come out with a lot of energy. They're going to put the Red Bulls under a lot of pressure early and probably, score a goal or two. But the fitness level of the Red Bulls is at such a ridiculous level that by the end of the game, I think they'll get some chances to level it up.
I'm a little pessimistic as far as Atlanta United is concerned. Unfortunately,
I don't see a reason to be so pessimistic with them. You're 1 point behind the Red Bulls right now.
No.
It's not pretty, but we were talking last night, and or on Seeing Red, I should say. Right. And one of the things that kept coming up was the same exact thing that I was talking about with the Red Bulls in terms of young players going through these difficult moments and learning lessons. I think Atlanta United is full of talented players, but they have to kind of figure out what it is that will make them a solid unit besides just being very talented players. And I don't expect that it's going to take them all season to figure that out.
No, I agree with that. I think you're getting to the point where players should be learning more about Heinz's system. I'll tell you this, at times it's looked worlds better than what it was under Frank de Boer, who, by the way, could lead the Netherlands to Euro 2020 because, of course,
he's not going to win that tournament. I think that group was soft. Yeah,
I agree. But like I said, I'm not. Yeah, like you said, there are some talented pieces, but I'm not convinced that against the Red Bulls they'll be able to kick things to a higher level from a offensive standpoint. Granted, they scored twice they scored twice last week against Philadelphia Union. Of course, they blew the 2-0 lead, but at the same time, the attack just looked flat and disjointed against NYCFC. So I'll say 2-1 Red Bulls, and I will say the streak against or their struggles against the Red Bulls, Atlanta struggles against the Red Bulls will continue. Where can people find you online, Joe?
You can follow me on Twitter at @Joe Goldstein. Like I said, I'm not very active there, so like a ghost town a little bit. I am the co-host of the Seeing Red podcast at seeingredny.com, and I do a podcast for the New York Red Bulls too, called Raising Bulls, and we are Raising Bull Cast. That's one bull, all at Twitter.
All right, Joe Goldstein, our guest tonight. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
Again, Joe Goldstein. You can follow, again, the Seeing Red podcast, as well as his Red Bulls 2 podcast in your favorite podcatcher. That is the end of another edition of Five Stripes Tonight. Again, thank you guys so much for joining me here on YouTube and Facebook. There's one question I had that RL mentioned, and it was referring to the transfer window for Atlanta United. I'll go ahead and answer that. The most important position they need to fill in this transfer window, and that's a tricky question, I will say. I think first things first. I was going to say a backup striker with ranks up front kind of low, but you have Jack and Conway already on the roster. So I wouldn't say backup striker. I would say maybe a midfielder, especially with Hyndman missing. Hyndman injured long-term with his ACL. I'll say that you may need to find somebody there to kind of make things happen there. I mean, you have Ibarra. I'll just step that back. You have Ibarra. You have some other options there. Josetu, players like that in the midfield that you can lean on. But I think you need some form of attack, some form of a player that can put balls in the net. And I think that what Atlanta United have right now, Conway notwithstanding, because we've not seen much of him, you need some form of attack. And I think that what Atlanta have, for the most part, isn't really cutting it, and they need some spark up there. So I think that'll probably be the most important position they need to fill. And maybe some reinforcements on the back line too, maybe. But I think they're fine back there. I think the players they have there are pretty set. But maybe you can add a piece or two, maybe on the outside. But I think attack is definitely an issue that Atlanta United need to add more bodies to. So, some bodies that can actually put the ball in the net, like I said, because what they have right now isn't really cutting it. And with that, we say goodbye, and we put a bow on this edition of Five Stripes Tonight. You can follow me at SHRites on Twitter, SHWRITES. Of course, go to DirtySouthSoccer.com, your home for all things Atlanta United. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. See you next time on Five Stripes Tonight.